After I had been unconscious for a while, I awoke suddenly to the shock of darkness. My eyes frantically searched for something to cling onto, but the enveloping shadows were whole and consuming. The only thing I could hear was my ragged breaths that filled the silence of the room, echoing off bare concrete. I tried to move my limbs, but they were bound tightly to the frame of a solid metal chair. My tongue was like cotton in my mouth, and the cut of rough cloth chafed at the blistered corners of my lips. My heart beat terribly loudly in my ears, and it became louder as a panic began to thrum wildly in my bones. At first all that came out of my mouth was a pathetic string of moans as I tried to clear my throat. Then I tried to speak, calling into the darkness. My throat scraped with the effort like sandpaper on skin, and most of the sound was muffled by the coarse cloth that gagged me. The wave of despair crashed against my body, pulling my mind beneath the waves of despair and making me breathless. I broke through the wave of emotion as my eyes darted back and forth frantically. I tried with maddening impotence to search my memory for answers. How had I gotten here? Where was this place? The smell of the room was foul and rotten, and the realization of my situation began to dawn. I struggled fiercely at my tight bindings, but they held strong, digging into the skin around my wrists and arms. The chair didn't move an inch, it had been bolted into the ground. I forced myself to take long deep breaths to calm my brain down, reminding myself of my rigorous training, but the gag around my mouth made breathing harder than it had to be. I was suddenly aware of an acute pain in my nose, accompanied by the scent of iron. My nose. It was broken. Fear rushed in cold sweats, forming a thick lump in my throat. And then, a door opened. My head instinctively turned in the direction of the sound of metal scraping against the floor. There was the sound of heavy footsteps approaching, and my heartbeat spiked madly. I managed to make out a couple German words before a group of men stood before me. The man who walked in first was of medium height. He had silvery blonde hair, and I recognized his piercing blue eyes instantly. It was the Austrian politician who had been Richard's business partner for many years. The man removed the gag from my mouth and addressed me in German. "Do you know who I am?" "Werner Lager," I said coldly. "Now, tell me, where is Dustin?" Lager chuckled darkly. "Your little friend is alive, and he will remain so, as long as he does what we ask him to do." My brain raced. I wanted to know what these Austrian men were doing in the Russian Federation, so I asked him casually what they were doing here. "Ah, since you ask so nicely, I see no harm in telling you my plans," the Austrian man smiled again. "You see, once you and your friend give me all the information I need, I promise to give you both a very quick and merciful death." The man paused. "And, if you behave well, I may even give you a proper burial, eh? Now, you wanted to know why I came to this Soviet wasteland. Well, me and some of my dear old colleagues will be profiting from a lucrative war that will hopefully go on for several years." "How would you profit from a war?" "Silly boy." Lager laughed cruelly. "Do you know why my stealth team shot down the Russian airmen in Dolinskoye? I had given them orders to sabotage both sides and start the war, but my plan was to have a colorful New Year's Eve, but the enlisted men in my team were eager to face action, and they started the Battle of Dolinskoye on the last week of December." "Your men launched those rocket attacks on Russian troops?" I exclaimed. I recalled the reports from the military dossier of how many Russian soldiers and officers were killed in a supposed Chechen attack. "Of course, we made it appear as though Chechen forces attacked Russian armored troops with rockets, and we knew that the Russians would then hit back with airstrikes. That attack was considered to be the first serious confrontation clash since Moscow sent its soldiers into the breakaway republic." Werner Lager was rubbing his hands together energetically as he spoke to me. "Now, tell me, who gave you the location of my command center? This location was supposed to be a secret." Werner said sharply. I shook my head in confusion. "I won't tell you anything until I see my friend." The cheerful look on the Austrian man's face disappeared. He looked very angry and repeated his question. I insisted that I must see Dustin first and make sure he is alive. This enraged him so much that before I realized it, his fist crashed against my jaw. The splitting pain struck my face, and for a moment the world spun like a carnival ride. A swarm of stars broke the vision of darkness, and my breath was forcibly snatched from my lungs, like the vacuum of space suddenly filled my body. I fought frantically to find the air again. There was total blackness, and a numb rush of adrenaline before the pain cracked like fissures in my jaw. All in one moment the air rushed back into my lungs and I involuntarily cried out as my body shook feverishly, trembling in trauma at the anticipation of what was coming next. Another blow slammed into my face, this time front on, cracking my nose even further. The scream I let out was wild and full of terror-born anguish. The pain consumed me, and the German voice came again. Even though I spoke Deutsch fluently, it took me a long while to translate the words in my head. "My dear boy, if you don't give me the information I am asking, then you will be killed." Werner Lager's voice was calm and collected, laced with a hint of sadistic amusement. I suppressed a shudder and took a deep breath. "I will tell you everything after I see my friend." The Austrian man looked at my resolute face, and perhaps he realized that no matter how much they hurt me, I will never volunteer any information. He finally sighed. "Very well, we will take you to him." He barked an order to his men, and they quickly untied my hands and feet. For a moment, I almost felt free, but the tall guards grabbed my arm and dragged me out of the room into a dimly lit hallway. I was thinking very quickly. As soon as they placed me near Dustin, I would carry out my secondary plan. Getting captured was my plan all along, because I knew this was the only way to find my friend. But I needed my captors to lead me to the location. After several minutes of marching, we arrived in a dark sub-level room. There was a metal cage in the center, and my dear friend was locked inside that place. Two giant dogs were barking ferociously just a few feet away, and it appeared as though they were about to attack and bite Dustin. I screamed in anger, because I knew how much Dustin was terrified of dogs. The young hacker had never even held a pistol in his entire life, and now his life was in danger because of me. When Dustin heard my voice, he ran to the metal gate and grabbed the bars. He told me to get him out of the cage as quickly as I could. I gave him a brief nod as a signal and pretended to collapse on the stone floor. One of the guards tried to grab me, but I seized his weapon from the holster and forced the other to drop his gun. After both men were disarmed, I took the keys from one of them and freed Dustin from the horrible cage. I also made the two men get inside the cage and locked them in. Escaping from the secure facility was harder than I had imagined, but I was lucky to have Dustin with me. Before he was kidnapped, Dustin was able to hack into the system and download the blueprint of the building. He knew the shortcuts, but we were still being pursued by armed guards who had been alerted of the escaped prisoners. I tried to run, but then realized that Dustin had an injury in his right foot. He was having trouble walking. I had to half hold him and half carry him out of the facility, and this slowed us down. But we made it out of the perimeter and jumped into one of the armored trucks belonging to the Austrian man. Dustin knew how to start a car without the keys, so he hotwired the vehicle, and we were finally able to put some distance between us and our captors. I thought the worst part of our journey was over, but this was just the beginning of our hell. For the next 3 days, we were on the run. Private mercenaries hired by the Austrian politician and weapons dealer chased us across the vast countryside of Russia. Dustin was able to find shelter for us in one of his hacker friend's house, but we did not want to endanger innocent people, so we kept moving. As we tried to stay alive, Dustin told me about what he had discovered during his research into Werner Lager's financial records. "What exactly did you find?" I asked, noticing that Dustin looked afraid to speak. The order came directly from Richard. "Your NSA Black Ops boss." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Richard ordered this hit on us." "And my kidnapping," Dustin insisted. "I have proof. He wired over $1 million the week before Werner Lager arrived in Russia. He told Lager to kidnap me." "Why did they want to take you? I don't understand." Dustin swallowed hard. "Werner asked me to hack into the Russian urban satellites and use thermal imaging to locate the 17 secret military bases of our army. So, that is what these Austrian mercenaries were after," I thought aloud. It finally made sense. Werner Lager was after Russia's weapon supplies, and he knew that the 17 military depot that officially did not exist stored all of the country's nuclear-grade missiles. This is what he meant when he claimed this war would offer him a profitable business deal and sales of weapon. Yes, but why is Richard paying him so much money to steal Russian weapons? Dustin asked me. I shook my head. We won't know until we confront Richard with this. I promise, I will get the truth out of him this time. Are we heading back to Maryland? Dustin wanted to know. I miss my small and secure lab in Randallstown. The hacker laughed nervously. At least, no one was torturing or killing me there. Listen, we can't go back just yet, I told the computer programmer. There is still a deadly war going on in the Russian border. Chechen and Russian civilians are dying every day because of an ugly war that was started by a corrupt Austrian man. And we are the only ones who know the truth, and we have to stop this war. We must try to end the killings. But how? Dustin wailed helplessly. How can you stop this war? Both sides are angry. Look. Read the newspaper headline today. 2,000 civilians were killed in Grozny 6 hours ago. Do you see how much anger exists on both sides? What can we possibly do? Dustin, have hope, I said sharply. You have all the evidence we need. You were able to download the files on Werner Lager and Richard, and I will forward those copies to Captain Peskov. If we can prove to the Russian government that the war in Chechnya was started by an Austrian weapons dealer, then they will understand that this bloodshed is useless. Russians should never kill Russians. We can convince them to agree to a peace deal. Dustin did not look convinced. But what about the Chechens? Russian airmen have been bombing so many villages that the population is very angry. What if they continue to fight? I have family there, I confided to Dustin. My mother's family still lives in Grozny. I will go there anyway to pay my respects to her burial place, and you will come with me. Together, we will meet the Chechen leader and tell them what Werner Lager's mercenaries did. Once they hear about how the Austrian criminals framed them and attacked Russian troops posing as them, then they will agree to a ceasefire, I am sure. Dustin looked terrified at the idea of going into the heart of the battle in Grozny, but we both agreed that this was the best course of action. 2 days later, we flew a private plane to a village near the city of Staderovskaya. From there, Dustin and I continued the journey on foot. We faced many obstacles, but after several difficult months, the hopeful day finally arrived. 2 State Duma officials and a Chechen senior commander agreed to meet for peace talks. It was already 1995, and I sincerely hoped that the end of war was near. This time, when I returned to the United States, I was determined to find out the truth. After landing in JFK Airport, I took a connecting flight directly to Virginia to meet Richard in his private office. I grabbed a briefcase that was filled with evidence and recording of Richard directly ordering his men to attack and kidnap Dustin, and I strolled into his office building. His secretary tried to stop me, but I brushed past her and entered his office. Richard gave a wide smile of happiness when he saw me. "You are back," he said warmly. "I am glad you are safe." I felt betrayed by his insincerity, so I raised my voice and said, "You tried to have me killed. Because of you, Dustin was tortured and nearly died." Richard looked surprised. "I don't know what you are talking about." "Don't lie to me anymore," I said exasperatedly. "I want the truth. Listen to these recordings. All of these calls went directly from your office line, and they are recorded conversations between you and your old associate from Austria, Werner Lager. You sent him money to sabotage the Russian Federation, and when Dustin discovered your plans, you tried to torture him and kill me as well." Richard quickly sank into his leather chair. He hid his face in his hands and whimpered. I thought he was crying. Finally, the middle-aged man spoke. "Look, I know you will not want to believe me, but the truth is very complicated. Yes, I made those phone calls. I had to order Werner to kill you, but it was the worst moment of my life. I was forced." "I don't believe you," I said instantly. "I heard the recordings. You cheerfully commanded your Austrian friend to torture Dustin and extract information. Richard raised his face. There was water in his eyes. I am sorry you don't believe in me, but the truth is one of my colleagues was standing right there, across this table. He pointed a gun to my head and told me to make the call to Werner and order the kills. I didn't want to do it, but he said he would shoot me if I didn't obey him. Believe me, I really hoped you would survive and come back. Richard spoke with such warmth and kindness that I couldn't find any words to describe my feelings. He was Irina's father, and I wanted to believe his words. Richard saw that I was confused, so he walked over the table and hugged me for a long time. I am so happy to see you again, he said softly, and tears glistened in his face. I really am. It pains me to think you would ever imagine I would want to hurt you. You're a son I never had. He spoke in a very affectionate paternal kind of way, and for a moment, I trusted him completely. In many ways, I saw him as a father figure. I decided to believe him and left the office as quickly as I came. I took a train and went to my rented apartment in Fairfax County. Before I could unlock my front door, I heard a faint noise. It was a static of a radio. I saw that the sound came from inside my mailbox, so I opened it and found a receiver. I grabbed it and a voice addressed me. The man on the radio told me to be at the archives section at the local library in 1 hour. He claimed to have all the answers to my questions about what happened to Dustin and myself in Russia. I wanted to tell him I already knew everything about what took place because Richard, who was the director of NSA's Black Ops division, had told me very clearly, but I was also curious to know who was the real culprit behind the sabotage in the Russian border. So many of my countrymen died right before my eyes, and I wanted to know why their lives were sacrificed. I agreed to the meeting and arrived at the library, and in the archives section, I found a book on the top shelf that had a note glued on the cover. It read, "Open the book." I quickly opened the book and found a small syringe hidden inside the pages. Another small scribbled note instructed me to inject myself with the liquid. I was hesitant. The liquid inside the hypodermic needle could be very dangerous, but I was desperate to know the answers. Whatever this chemical was, it couldn't be poison. Why would a man want to meet with me and tell me to kill myself? If he wanted me dead, he could have shot me in front of my apartment door. I waited a few moments, then closed my eyes and injected myself with the clear liquid. Seconds later, I felt very tired and collapsed on the ground. I woke up inside a sparsely furnished office. The long wooden table was set in the middle, and an elderly man was leaning against it. I recognized the man's face, but could not remember his name. "I've seen you before," I told the man. When he saw that I was awake, he walked nearer and sat on a chair. "Thank you for coming," he said. "My name is Neil Cooper. I am the Director of Cyber and Espionage Operations, and am liaising with the Internal Affairs Investigation Committee." "But you are wearing an army uniform," I blurted out. Neil Cooper nodded. "Yes, that is because until last year, I was the senior authority at the U.S. Central Command Air Forces in Southwest Asia." "Where are we right now?" I asked Cooper. The Army commander waved his hand. "Oh, we are at my headquarters at the U.S. Air Force in Arlington, Virginia. Surely, you recognize the landscape." "Why the secrecy?" I wanted to know. "You could have met me in a park or in a normal place." Neil Cooper sighed. "I needed to be sure you were not followed. There are some things I need to tell you about your employer." "Richard?" I asked. The Army commander nodded his head. "How long have you known Richard?" I asked. Commander Cooper frowned slightly. "When I first met Richard, he was already working at the Special Clandestine Service, a highly classified U.S. government black budget program that was created to combat global terrorism and protect America and its allies. This was a joint Central Intelligence Agency National Security Agency program that conducted spying worldwide. Richard was given an autonomous branch that he later turned into his own Black Ops unit at the NSA, a group you have worked for as well." I was still a little confused, so I said, "Yes, but why did you want to meet with me specifically?" Because there are some things the Army Intelligence Department have discovered about Richard. I wanted to ask you if you knew anything about this. I had a few recordings of him ordering an assassination, but Richard already explained everything to me. He said he was being coerced into doing that. Richard manipulated you, son. Cooper shook his head sadly. The intelligence official then showed me evidence that proved that Richard had been using his covert black ops unit of the NSA to carry out illegal activities and had been hiring freelance mercenaries who conducted black market trading of weapons, military secrets, industrial intelligence, medical technology, and computer software at his behest. His clients included governments, corporations, wealthy citizens, and even influential families. I was in shock. I knew Richard did not always follow strict protocol, but I wanted to believe that he was an honest man. How could he talk to me in arena so eloquently and be a criminal? Neil Cooper seemed to have read my mind. Your former boss cared only about himself. All he wants is to achieve world domination through control of national governments and the selling of weapons and intelligence for profit and power. That is exactly why he used his old friend Werner to start a war in Russia. He wants to profit from arms sales, and he doesn't care about how many civilians dies. If the Pentagon has all these evidence against him, why don't they press charges? I asked the commander. It is not easy, he explained. Richard covered his tracks well. He framed his old associates for each of his crimes. For example, everyone in the Department of Defense saw the confession tape of W.H. Buccaneer. The old politician left behind a death note that detailed how Richard persuaded him to take responsibility for the hijacking of the Soviet nuclear-powered submarine. We already know Richard hired mercenaries to carry out that sabotage in order to expand his influence over the former Soviet Union, and there is paper trail that proves he used his personal bank account to fund those operations, but there is not much we can do. The court will dismiss most of these charges as circumstantial. But why don't you at least try to arrest him, temporarily, and if you question him, I am sure he will tell us the truth. Neil Cooper looked disgusted. The old sick man is on the run, actually. Lucky for him, because if I got my hands on that mass murderer, I would have destroyed him. I had evidence that he was involved in illegal activities, I admitted to the commander, but Richard convinced me that he was innocent. He shot one of his friends right in front of me. The man named Buccaneer. Yeah, of course he did. To hide evidence and silence the only witness who could testify against him. Commander Cooper clicked his tongue disapprovingly. But Richard forgot to put this into the equation. What is this? I pointed at the CD player on his desk. The confession video which Buccaneer left before he died. Neil Cooper pressed the play button. If you watch the whole thing, you will notice that he claims that Richard was his old friend and begged him to take the fall for some of his crimes, but he knew Richard didn't always play it clean, so he kept a backup failsafe in case Richard ever turned on him, then this would go viral. So, the man was innocent. I gasped. I could still remember the horrific scene when Richard unflinchingly shot that old man in Washington, D.C. and in broad daylight. I am afraid Richard killed a lot of innocent people in the recent years. The director of cyber and espionage operations answered. He pays $100 million each year to a terrorist organization in Lithuania, known as the Beluga faction. They have been responsible for the bombing of over 5 churches and shopping malls. Then why don't the CIA neutralize the members of Richard's European crime group? I asked him. Neil Cooper answered tersely. Because we still don't know who the leaders are. Besides, our Echelon interceptor captured some audio that indicates that the Beluga faction are trying to acquire a new kind of weapon. What sort of weapon are they after? I asked. The army commander looked distressed. It is a water contaminant of some sort. It can wipe out entire ecosystem. We know this because Richard already acquired a sample of racecatetrol drug, but he is planning to use Beluga faction to purchase the compound in bulk. We are not certain who their targets are, but they seem to be planning to use it against the former Soviet Union satellite states. Richard is targeting Russia. The pitch of my voice increased due to worry. Neil Cooper laughed humorlessly. Are you really surprised? Richard is the man who hired his old mercenary friend to enter the Russian Federation illegally last year and cook up an artificial war against Chechnya by first attacking Russian troops and pretending that the Chechen fighters were responsible. I also intercepted communique that proves that Richard directly threatened the Russian leader of dire consequences if he did not invade Chechnya at once. His orders were clear: to flatten the entire region. Why Chechnya in particular? I inquired. What would Richard gain by destroying that region? We are not certain yet, but one particular order was to make sure everyone in the village of Samashki, at the border between Chechnya and Ingushetia, had to be executed. Richard ordered that. I gasped. I could feel my heartbeat racing. Commander Cooper noticed the panic on my face and asked if I was okay. Did that village mean anything special to you? My mother's family lived there, I whispered, trying to speak coherently. My throat tightened painfully as I tried to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over my cheek. My mother's aunt and cousins lived near that village. It was an odd thing to do, Neil Cooper said thoughtfully. That village was of no strategic importance to Richard, yet he wanted to kill every single civilian inside it. Do you think it was related to you? I shook my head miserably. I don't know. I don't care anymore why he did it. All my family is dead now. Everyone. Gone. Commander, you must help with the rescue operations in the Russian border. Too many people died already. The director of cyber and espionage operations suddenly looked very angry. These bloody Russian soldiers are responsible for this carnage. They bombed over civilians' residential areas and killed thousands of people in Grozny. What kind of savages kill their own people? I am an American military officer, and I can promise you that no American soldier would ever agree to bomb another state. Can you ever imagine that a Texan pilot would aerial bombard civilian homes in New Jersey or California? No US soldier would ever agree to kill fellow Americans. But those Russians did. Commander, you told me yourself, Richard was responsible for this carnage. He forced the Russian leader to involve the troops. I get that, Cooper replied impatiently. But the individual soldiers didn't have to go around murdering ethnic Russians and Chechens in Grozny. They could have refused to bomb innocent people. Recent estimate suggests that at least 30,000 civilians were murdered by Russian troops. Monsters. Many soldiers refused to fight, Commander Cooper, I replied quickly. Bullshit, Cooper snapped. I always knew the Russians were fucked up people. I just don't understand why you can still love those psychos. What are you talking about? I said, alarmed to hear him speak profanely about my countrymen. You know what I am talking about, Cooper said. Russians are all insane. I mean, what kind of people bomb their own people to death? Imagine American Air Force and Marines. They would never have gone ahead to bomb Philadelphia, Nevada or Connecticut. They would never have agreed. No sane person would have agreed to do something like this, I told the American commander. But I also know this. Most Russian soldiers didn't agree with their orders and they refused to fight in Chechnya. A lot of men defected, resigned, and several generals also protested. Some sabotaged their own weapons and vehicles to avoid bombing Chechens and ethnic Russians who lived there. But what can you say? It was all part of Richard's terrible manipulation. Hey, let me make it clear to you, son. Richard didn't fly F-16 over Russia to bomb kids. Russian infantrymen did that. True, but I have worked for Richard in the NSA's Black Ops unit, and I know he can make people do strange things. He can wrap you around his fingers and control you like a puppet. He gains your trust by pretending like he cares about us, and that is how he has so many loyal people to work for him. He owns their souls. He owned mine for 10 years. Every time something went wrong in my missions, I would confront him, but he would explain it to me, and even though it sounded suspicious, I still believed him. Or, maybe, I wanted to believe him. I recalled what Captain Peskov had told me earlier. The Russian officer told me how most of his men refused to launch a land invasion into Chechnya even after the High Command ordered them to attack. Where did you hear that? Neil Cooper asked skeptically. I know it, because it is a fact, I said, suppressing tears of rage. Hundreds of soldiers who were sent to the border with instructions to invade Chechnya refused to wage war against their own countrymen, and so they fled from their post, and some of them even sabotaged their own vehicles in order to avoid launching a ground invasion. So, you see, you are wrong to say that Russian soldiers were happy to kill other Russian citizens. No one wanted this twisted war to happen. Maybe some kid soldier felt bad about it, fine, but the Russian commanders had no problem in sending thousands of their troops to the line of fire. But many Russian officers, and even generals, resigned in protest. They did not want this war either. I countered immediately. Look, Commander, I know you think all Russians are savages, but that is simply not true. Most Russian citizens were against the entire warfare. The director of cyber and espionage operations looked sympathetic, but his words were sharp. All right, son, I see that you are trying to defend your motherland, and that is great, but Russian military needs to take responsibility for all the war crimes and massacre they carried out in Grozny, because Richard didn't go there and kill those innocent kids in Chechnya. Look at these cables. I handed the American intelligence commander a copy of Dustin's files. These are records my friend recovered from a secure site in Russia, where one of Richard's associates were holding us hostage. An entire team of MVD troops that was charged with handling counterinsurgency operations in Grozny had been working directly under Richard's orders. They were told to bomb indiscriminately. No Russian officer would have ever commanded his men to do that. You may be right, Neil Cooper finally said. I guess, right now, we should focus on Richard's latest mission. Which is? I asked, already confused about what I had been discussing with him earlier. According to our intel, we discovered that Richard is setting a huge reservoir in his base of operations. If we are right, he is planning to use that site to contaminate the water supply of the Russian Federation. I shuddered in terror, thinking about what other disasters Richard was planning on Russia. Where is his base of operation? Neil Cooper consulted his map and replied. Right now, he is operating from a decommissioned chemical facility north of the Malinka industrial zone. How did you find out the precise area? I asked, surprised. My code breaker was able to pinpoint his exact location based on declassified KGB files and some thermal satellite imaging. We had that facility under thermal satellite, and our counterintelligence department created an accurate blueprint of the site. I bet he planned out this Chechen-Russian war while vacationing in his pathetic hideout there. I pressed for information. What do you know about the details of Richard's involvement in this war? Cooper displayed a list of numbers. Richard sent his mercenaries, first to Chechnya to start a local uprising, and then he used the chaos as a pretext and ordered the president of the Russian Federation to bomb every single city in Chechnya, and he hoped that publicly, once the word of the secession of Chechnya spread, it would prompt a domino effect of independence movements within the vast Russian Federation and trigger numerous conflicts. And the winners of this bloodshed would be Richard and his cronies in the illegal arms and drug trade. We have solid proof that he was responsible for the hijacking of the Soviet nuclear-powered submarine in 1989. How do you know all this? I asked. Even if you are right, and Richard is guilty of all those things, he is too smart to leave behind such obvious trails. Richard didn't leave any obvious trails, the intelligence commander agreed. But I placed a tap on his home line. He contacted an Eastern European underworld gang leader 30 minutes after the submarine was hijacked, before Kremlin or anyone else even knew about the incident. The call was encrypted, but I got a location. A small island on the Persian Gulf. My employees hacked into the hotel's CCTV and found this. Neil Cooper handed me the transcript of a dozen of phone conversations, along with photographs of the speakers, but I did not wish to read them. This still doesn't make sense, I told the intelligence commander. If Richard went through all this trouble to start the Russian war in Grozny, then why did he send Dustin and me to the region? I don't know why he sent you there, kid, but I do know this. After you left the United States, from the moment you touched down in Moscow, you and your friend's life have come under steady attacks. And you probably won't be surprised to hear this, but we have traced almost all phone calls Richard made from his secure line. During the first 2 weeks, he made a dozen international phone calls. We were not able to identify the person on the other end because those calls were routed through relay stations, but my engineers did get the destination location. It was in Russia. I know, I admitted hesitantly. Richard told me he had to order those kill hits on me and Dustin because one of his colleagues held a gun to his head and forced him to do it. He apologized to me. And you believed him? Neil Cooper said incredulously. I hoped he was telling the truth. I admitted. This would be the second time your old boss is feeding you bullshit. He fought desperately to start the first Gulf War, and then he couldn't wait 3 years before cooking up another war in Russia, and both times, you buy into his narrative of what happened. How can you be so sure that Richard started this war? The fighting was real. The Russian government chose to intervene in Chechnya in order to stop the rebellion. There are 2 questions you need to be asking, the director of cyber and espionage operations told me. One is who was really behind the alleged rebellion. And secondly, who was responsible for that one particular attack which triggered a ground invasion. When 20 airmen were killed after their base was hit by a rocket. And we now know who was responsible for firing the rocket. The intelligence commander used his laser printer to produce 2 pages of single-space digits and corresponding locations. He handed them over to me, explaining how each number contained an 11-digit bank transfer receipt code, unmistakable evidence of mammoth installments delivered in 3 phases. Each of the bank transfers were made to separate individuals, their identity anonymized by a secure dark web conference line. He explained how Richard had wired these amounts to several of his underground criminal contacts in Germany, Austria, and Lithuania. Are all 3 bank transfers equal in amount? I questioned. Neil Cooper consulted the printed sheet before replying. 2 of the transactions are identical. 15 million each. The last one was finalized 2 days ago. 20 million US dollars. Did you find out who received that money? I asked. No, but I figured out a way to make contact with the anonymous men on the other end. They didn't just use the secure line to exchange money, they passed on messages. I can't read all the scrambled sentences, obviously, but our data collection monitor flagged several high-resolution images. The NSA Black Ops chief sent messages to the 3 men. And 2 passport-sized picture images. Recognize them? I took in a sharp breath as I saw the sheet of paper. There was a color photo of Dustin and a headshot of myself in the file. The small note below the picture mentioned that both targets must be debriefed and eliminated. These were classic terms intelligence operatives used to mean torture and execution. It was very painful to imagine that Richard would give his men orders to kill and torture Dustin and myself. I had trusted and even liked Richard and sometimes considered him to be almost a father figure, but all the past emotions were dying away in my heart. I could only think of one thing: how could he have ordered Russian troops to bombard the villages adjacent to Grozny? Why did those thousands of civilians have to die? It was so cruel of the world to snatch away all my relatives from me. Wasn't it enough that I had lost my mother? No, but the pain was building upon more pain, and that holy ground upon which I had buried her remains were now reduced to burning rubble. My mother's family graveyard in Grozny had also been reduced to a heap of smokes and crumbling stone. My grandparents' resting place was also desecrated, and all their descendants were gone. For a moment, I was sad that the assassins who had tried to kill me could not succeed. Had I been dead, I would not have to suffer this terrible sadness in my heart, and I would not have to see all my family members burning to death in the aerial bombardments. All the lives lost in a useless war, a battle financed and ordered by the corrupt director of NSA's Black Ops division. What a loss. I never realized before that the world could be so cruel to someone. I was so engrossed in my thoughts that I almost forgot that Neil Cooper was standing in front of me. He was speaking again. Giving images of a person is the classic method for anonymous assassination, where neither the hirer or the would-be assassin ever gets to know each other. I think these huge sums of money Richard sent to his hitmen was for disposing of a specific target, you and your hacker friend. After months of fighting, much like the Soviet war in Afghanistan, the First Chechen War also ended in a stalemate because Russia agreed to pull its troops out after signing a peace accord that allowed people in the Chechen region to self-rule themselves. But the damage had been done. Richard did not ultimately succeed in his plans, but because of this war, thousands of people on both sides suffered. All this news shocked me greatly, and I knew that Richard's political and intelligence circle was beginning to resemble the myth of Icarus, a minor character in Greek mythology who plunged to Earth after ignoring warnings that his waxen wings would melt if he flew too close to the sun. Richard seemed to have gone too far with his criminal activities. Neil Cooper was playing a video on the projector screen on his wall. I glanced briefly at it and noticed that it was the confession video of W.H. Buccaneer. I had seen Richard execute him in public, so this video disturbed me greatly. I asked Cooper why he was replaying the tape. "I am trying to show you how deluded you were," Cooper told me. "Richard have been playing you all along." "I know this already," I said impatiently. "Richard framed Buccaneer for his own crimes, but it is too late to change that because that man is dead. What I don't understand is why you are showing me this now, when that person was killed in Washington 4 years ago. You want to know the truth?" An unnamed Pentagon official received and shared a copy of the confession video of this old man, and since then, we have been tapping Richard's phone and been keeping a close eye on him. However, we couldn't use this video in court as evidence against him because Buccaneer admits he was Richard's close friend and had volunteered to take the fall for him, but he also mentions that he knows Richard very well. He knew Richard often kills the people whom he uses to gain something, so in case he died, this videotape would automatically be sent to Pentagon's archival department. "So, the CIA had no idea?" I asked. Cooper hesitated. "Yes and no. In the confession video, he said Richard asked him to take the blame for the USS Roosevelt sabotage and attack, but eventually, he knew he might be killed, so he arranged to keep the original paper trail and evidences in a folder and mail it to Langley's main office in case he died. Due to the sensitive nature of the material, the CIA kept the file classified and fired most of the employees who were involved in declassifying the information." "What do you know about the other man who Richard told me about?" Neil Cooper looked puzzled for a moment. "Oh, yes, the colleague of his who apparently held a gun to Richard's head and ordered him to execute you. That is Clarence Hill." "Do you know him?" Cooper nodded. "Yes, we all do. Clarence Hill was the deputy director of the Defense Security Agency, and this week, he turned himself over to the Maryland Police Department and confessed to being responsible for starting the Chechen War." "Which prison is he being held in right now?" I asked. The director of cyber and espionage operations looked alarmed. "Why do you ask? That is a classified information. The deputy director of the Defense Security Agency is high-priority prisoner and is being held in a secure facility awaiting trial." "Look, Commander, I respect that, but I really need to meet him personally. I need to ask Clarence Hill why he did it. And why he blackmailed Richard. I need to find out the truth." Cooper sighed heavily. "Well, I will make a phone call to the federal penitentiary and see if they can grant you a visitor's pass." He walked me to his office door. "Check your mailbox by tomorrow morning, and if the prison warden approves my request, you will find your pass in there." I thanked the man and left the granite building. By noon the next day, I was waiting at the prison gates as the security guards verified my identity papers. It was all in order, and I was allowed to enter the heavily fortified windowless concrete building. When I sat in the visiting across Clarence Hill, I thought he looked very frail. The former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency looked surprised to see me. "Young man, do I know you?" Hill asked me in a croaky voice. "No, but I used to work for Richard," I told him. "Did Richard send you?" the old man said, suddenly looking around the visiting space. I raised my hand to calm his fears and then told him about everything that happened in Chechnya and Russia's border. I described the war that had just taken place, and then I finally confronted him with the information Richard had confided in me. Richard said you put a gun to his head and forced him to order my assassination. Before I could finish my question, the old man nodded vigorously. Yes, I did everything. Please believe me, I am responsible for all those crimes. What about the assassination of the Russian ambassador? I said. Did you order it too? Clarence Hill nodded again. Yes, of course I did. Richard had nothing to do with the assassination. I personally wanted that bastard dead, so I had him killed. I scoffed openly. Mr. Hill. Now I can see that you are lying. I only asked you this to test you. There was no assassination attempts on the Russian diplomat. But you are desperate to admit to all kinds of crimes. Why are you doing this? The former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency didn't reply. Are you afraid of Richard? Is that why you are protecting him? I asked again. Again, Clarence Hill did not answer my question. I waited for a moment, then I placed a small portable CD player on the desk and played the confession tape of W.H. Buccaneer, the man who had taken responsibility for Richard's crime before the Gulf War broke out. I also told the prisoner how Richard executed him in broad daylight because he feared Buccaneer could become a liability. After I played the entire confession tape, I begged him to tell me the truth. The man you are seeing in this video is W.H. Buccaneer. He was a politician living in Washington, D.C., and like you, he was also Richard's friend. And you know what, after Buccaneer outlived his usefulness, Richard shot him dead right in front of me. That is how he deals with people who does favors for him. I know you are a good man, Mr. Hill. You would never try to kill thousands of innocent civilians. Thousands of civilians? Clarence Hill repeated. Dead? I told him how tens of thousands of civilians perished in Chechnyan cities and villages, and how thousands of children had died in the air raids that spanned over 1 year. Richard said you were responsible for the entire scenario, and he told me you started this war. That isn't true, is it? The former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency took a deep breath. I agreed to take the blame for all this because Richard assured me that innocent people would not die. He said he only wanted to make some financial profits by starting a war in Russia. I was confused. How would Richard gain financially? Aside from accelerated weapon sale, Richard said he was told by several Sberbank currency analysts that the value of ruble would fall in the event of a war, and he and his business partners would capitalize on the disaster and profit from the bloodshed. The way he planned it, Richard would persuade the US Senate to place restrictions on Russia's sovereign debt because it would then trigger a multi-billion-dollar sell-off of Russian bonds and increase borrowing costs for the Kremlin. This would liquidate Russian economy and put money in Richard's pocket. So, he asked you to claim responsibility for all the crimes he committed. Why did you agree? I agreed to this because he convinced me that it was important for him to stay in his official government position. I thought Richard could do a lot of good in the world if he was the director of NSA's Black Ops unit. His talents could have benefited our country. You were deceived, I commented. Richard was causing deadly wars in various parts of the world. And like he did last time, Richard merely persuaded one of his trusted co-workers to take the blame for the crimes he committed. We need to stop him. With your help, we can. What can I do? Clarence Hill asked. You can testify against him in court. Tell the jury how he forced you to take the blame for his crimes. My life will be in danger, Clarence Hill protested. If I go against him, he will destroy my life. This is your chance of doing the right thing, I pleaded with the old man. Okay, I will do this, but only on one condition, the former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency said slowly. You will have to arrange for a full pardon, commuting of my sentence, and provide me with a witness protection. Then I will testify in court and tell them how Richard ordered those assassinations and hired mercenaries to attack Russian military installations. After I secured a promise from Clarence Hill, I drove out of the prison ground, relieved that someone had been brave enough to speak the truth. 2 hours later, I got a phone call from my friend Dustin. He called to tell me that Clarence Hill was dead. The man I met only hours ago was found dead in his cell block, and prison medical staff suggested that it was a suicide. I suspected something was suspicious about this, because why would he mysteriously die moments after agreeing to testify against Richard? So, I asked Dustin to check the prison visiting logs to check who else came to see Clarence Hill. The Russian hacker contacted me a few minutes later and said immediately, after I had left the prison complex, the former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency had a new visitor, his estranged brother from Arkansas. I was mildly surprised to hear that. Why would the old man's brother want to kill him? I then asked Dustin to check all the CCTV camera footages around the penitentiary, but the hacker complained that all of the camera recordings were wiped clean during the time of the visit. This was highly unusual. I couldn't imagine who had the kind of authority to erase the surveillance footages of an entire prison complex, but as I was scouring the area, I noticed a hardware store 2 avenue blocks across the prison entrance. A small manual camera was fitted into exterior lawn. I retrieved the video spool and recovered the camera images. It showed a man with a long coat and small briefcase entering the prison grounds minutes after I had left. Before passing the prison gates, the man momentarily turned his head. I froze when I saw his face. It was Richard. Thousands of questions raced through my mind. What was he doing in this prison? Had he been following me? Now that I knew Richard had been at the federal penitentiary, I took an old file photo of him and interrogated the prison guards. They confirmed that this man had come to visit Clarence Hill after I left, and the next time they checked on him, the former deputy director of the Defense Security Agency was dead. My heart was broken at this loss because I could not protect that old man. He had been terrified of the idea of testifying against Richard, and now he was dead. I did not have any more solid evidence tying Richard to all those violent crimes he had carried out over the years. It was shocking to see that Richard was desperate enough to kill his own friend in prison to prevent him from testifying in court. My friend Dustin had been conducting a side investigation into Richard, and 1 week later, he called me to his computer lab to tell me what he had discovered. Dustin said he kept a tab on my travel itinerary and noticed that in the last few years, each time I visited my mother's burial place in southern Russia, Richard had hired 2 of his trusted black ops mercenaries to spy on me. I was terrified to hear this news. This meant my secret was not safe. If Richard had me followed all the way to Grozny, he must have found out all the details about the family members I had in the Caucasus region. My mother's cousins and other relatives were residing there. But most importantly, I was devastated to hear that the family graveyard I had placed my mother to rest was desecrated by aerial bombardment. After some deep contemplation, I reluctantly made the decision to move my mother's remains from the dilapidated London cemetery to her birthplace in Grozny, so she could spend her eternity with her deceased parents and grandparents. But my plans were awfully flawed because, despite taking so many precautions, my enemies discovered the location of my mother's family and destroyed that place. Dustin also showed me authenticated communique that went directly from Richard's NSA office to Kremlin, where he persuades State Duma leaders to bombard certain villages and cities near Grozny. The cable spelled out an ultimatum that suggested that, if the Russian officials disobeyed his commands, he would expose sensitive state secrets to the world media. Moscow caved in to his demands, and the military agreed to bomb and kill tens of thousands of civilians in southern Russia. In a single aerial attack, my mother's hometown was completely destroyed. All her family members, every last living relative of mine was dead. There was no one else in this world who had my mother's blood running through their veins. I terribly regretted ever moving my mother's burial place to Chechnya. Somehow, I believed if I never moved her there, this war would not have taken place. And all my mother's relatives would not have died in vain. It was later that year, I came across some damning information. The former head of Poland's Committee for Public Security contacted me personally because he was one of my instructors at the KGB colonel's training camp. The man said he received a report that some unidentified maritime agents were operating from a network of artificial island bases in the South Baltic Sea. It was an aggressive gesture, and the Russian Navy decided to be cautious and deployed large numbers of strategic bombers in a maritime role, including activating special submarines in the Baltic and Black Sea, with nuclear-armed vessels patrolling the remote corners of Russia's western Arctic. Those submarines were armed with nuclear warheads and traveled at high speeds and operated with reactor technology. The flurry of movement beneath the Arctic caused the American Navy to scramble its own ships and alert the US submarines in the Atlantic Ocean. I once asked a colleague what was the purpose of parading those giant ships and submarines, because it could be misread as an act of aggression. But he said the US government knew the primary role of these anti-missile aircraft was to protect the Soviet mainland from attacks by US carrier task forces, and as long as they remained vigilant, rival parties would feel discouraged to engage irresponsibly. The US Department of Defense knew that the general purpose of those underwater patrols was data collection. These submarines often intercepted NATO's lines of communication across the North Atlantic Ocean between Europe and North America, and this way, Russian leaders made sure the world remained peaceful.